All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Farmer Data Initiatives session of the Big Data and Ag Symposium. My name is Murray Fulton, and for those of you who've tuned in before, you'll know that I am a professor in the Johnson Cheyenne Graduate School of Public Policy at the University of Saskatchewan. Among the issues that were raised this morning in our opening session were alternative organizational models for the collection and use of ag data. In this session, our speakers outline what producers and farm organizations are doing and what kinds of models they are using to deal with data ownership, privacy, and control. And these were, in fact, the issues that were identified then in some of the subsequent sessions today. We are fortunate to have three superb speakers to join us today. All of them are online, and what I'd like to do is introduce them, and then we can move through their presentations without interruption. Matt Meisner is the Vice President of R&D and Data Science at the Farm Business Network, or FBN, where he leads scientific research and technical development and created the FBN analytics system. Matt earned his BS in biological sciences from MIT and his PhD in population biology at UC Davis. While in graduate school, Matt worked with hundreds of cotton and citrus farmers in California to develop novel pest and crop prediction models by applying big data, statistical computing, and machine learning techniques. Billy Tiller was raised on a farm west of Lubbock, Texas, where he still resides. He graduated from Texas Tech University in 1986. He has been an innovator in the ag industry, has held both board and executive leadership roles in rural telecommunications, ag banking, ag technology, and ag production. He is the fourth generation to manage a large family-owned production ag operation raising cotton, grains, and for many years, cattle. And for the purposes of today's presentation, he's the co-founder of Grower Information Services Co-op, or GISC, and is currently its CEO. GISC was founded in late 2012 as the world's first ag data co-op. And finally, Dr. Karen Hand received her PhD in biostatistics from the University of Guelph. As founder and president of Precision Strategic Solutions and Ag ID, Dr. Hand has been involved in numerous research and industry projects involving the analysis, modeling, and management of Canadian agri-food data, including the architecture and implementation of a national disease surveillance system. Dr. Hand has been engaged in numerous activities with the Canadian agri-food supply chain to drive comprehensive digital transformation strategies from a technological and governance perspective. It's quite a lineup of speakers. I have had an opportunity to talk with all of them, and I think you're in for a real surprise this afternoon. These people really know what is going on in the data area. They're working in this area on a day-by-day basis. And with that, I'm going to turn it over. I think we'll start with Matt, and then I think we'll go to Billy and then Karen in that order. And I'll just leave the speakers to move on as I've introduced them, and then I'll come back at the end and we'll have some questions. So with no further ado, Matt.
Great, thanks everyone. And just to make sure everybody can see my slides okay before I get started here? Yes. Okay, perfect. Well, thank you very much, everyone. It's great to be here. I really wish I could be there in person, but unfortunately, fortunately not possible this time, but look forward to hopefully being there in the future. So I appreciate the warm intro, and like Like we just noted, I have been with Farmers Business Network since we started the company back in 2014 and worked on a lot of our data initiatives over time. So looking forward to sharing a little bit more about who we are, what we do, how we think about data, and the value that it can bring to growers, and looking forward to a good discussion. So for today, I was going to give a little bit of just an FBN overview. We're a relatively new company and just want to bring everybody up to speed on who we are and what we're focused on. I'll then talk a bit about how big data and data science are applied at FBN to help our farmer members be more efficient. And then I'll end with a little bit of perspective on just some thoughts on how we think about data ownership, privacy control, transparency around those topics, which is really important in the ag industry. So to start off with, I just want to give a quick intro of Farmers Business Network. Like I said, we started about 8 years ago, so we're still a relatively new company, but our mission has really been very consistent over the years, even though our company has grown and evolved a good deal since we started. And our mission has always been to help farmers be more efficient and more successful, more profitable, more sustainable, both economically and environmentally. And this is obviously a very wide-reaching goal, but really at the core of everything we do is thinking about how to further that mission. And the way we achieve that is really by taking our network of commercial growers who really make FBN what it is. So FBN is at its core a network of farmers, a network of commercial growers. You can see here that network has grown to cover about 35,000 growers and almost 90 million acres of farmland in the 3 countries that we operate. And we started in the US, quickly expanded to Western Canada as well. So we have a large number of growers in British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba. Those are big areas for us in Canada. And also a little bit in Australia. So just to give a sense of scale, this is in the ballpark of 15 to 20% of the row crop acres in the markets that we're operating in who have joined the network and become a member of FBN. What we then do is we use that network to provide services, tools, businesses, et cetera, back to the grower networks to help them help growers be more efficient and more successful. And there's a couple of different vectors on which we've tackled that, and we're not going to talk about all of these because FBN has grown to encompass quite a number of different offerings that we deliver to the members. But I'll focus mainly on the left bucket, which is really our system of analytics and data designed to help farmers make decisions about their operation and really confidently operate their farm using data to their advantage. We also have commercial businesses that help farmers buy inputs for their farm, described in the middle bucket here. And then also a variety of services on the right, focused more on financial services for growers in terms of helping growers obtain crop insurance, market their grain, obtain financing for inputs and things like that, and also achieve premiums for their grain for sustainability metrics about their farm data. So they're related, but we're going to really focus mainly on the left bucket, which is on how we help farmers use data to make decisions and operate their farm. FBN has grown now to cover about 900 employees around the world. So our headquarters is in the Bay Area in California, where we have a lot of our technology team. That we have offices around the country, and also a large office in High River, south of Calgary, and in Australia as well. So that's a quick summary of FBN, and want to move into the meat of the talk here, which is describing a little bit more about how we leverage data at FBN to really help the network be more profitable and more efficient. So to summarize the way we think about data at FBN, right, really our goal is to help our farmers be as efficient as possible and really using the data from the network to make decisions and optimize practices in a way that helps growers maximize their efficiency and profitability. And there's a bunch of different ways that we do this. We'll walk through some examples. but a lot of it is focused on how do we optimize the inputs that farmers are using, both the quantity, the timing, the price, which products to use, things like that. And also, how do we make management practices around agronomic considerations and crop management decisions that can help farmers be as successful as possible. The way we do that is by aggregating a really robust data set about every farm in FBN. So when a farmer joins FBN, one of the first things that we do is map out their field locations and start to collect data about those fields to the best of our ability. So this is growers submitting data from their farming equipment. So growers who have precision equipment that is recording data from sensors on the farm equipment is data that we are very eager to ingest. We supplement that with data on other agronomic practices. We supplement that with third-party weather, soil, terrain, remote sensing data, many of those from public government data sources, which provide a tremendous value in supplementing data from the farm and really trying to build a really complete picture of everything that happened on each field. The next step is taking that data from each field and then aggregating it together across the network. And we'll talk about this in a second, but this is, in our view, where the true value of data in agriculture really becomes transparent and where you can really help growers make the most value out of data is when the data is aggregated and shared in a useful form, right? Every farmer with data from their own farm provides value for sure, but when that data is aggregated and shared across a wide network of growers, the value of that data really is greater than the sum of the parts. And we'll talk a little bit about why we think that's the case. Just to give a sense of scale, over time, as you can see, really what the FBN data set has become, has really come to cover hundreds of millions of acre years of data, aggregated across the network and multiple growing seasons, and has become a really powerful tool for us to help. Has been a really powerful tool to help us develop some of the analytics that we offer back to the network. Now, I'll talk a little bit about two of the reasons why we feel data that's aggregated from a large network of growers provides a lot of benefits back to farms in the network. So the first one I'm going to talk about is what is a very simple statistical concept, but is in reality, you have to aggregate data from a lot of growers in order to achieve the benefits here. And the idea here is that the more data you get, right, the data you have from more growers, the more confidence you can have in the insights that you derive from that data set. A good example of why having so much data really matters is what we're looking at here, which is an example of how yield for a given product evolved over time in FBN as we collected more and more data about this particular hybrid. So this is a canola hybrid, was very, very popular for a long time. I think it's now since on its way out, but it's been a very popular product in Western Canada for a long time. And as we move from left to right along the x-axis here, we see how the picture of how the performance of this product changed as we collected more and more data about this hybrid. The green dots here are the individual grower yields, and the black line is the FBN average. And you can see how this evolved, right? We got some low yields in at first, about 20 bushels an acre, that were followed by some higher yields at 40, 50, 60 bushels an acre that pulled the average up, that were subsequently followed by some lower yields that came in that dragged the average back down. Basically, every time we got new data, our picture of performance of this hybrid changed, right? We got new information and we got a new updated view of performance of this hybrid, which is good. But the problem is that that's very noisy, right? In the first couple hundred acres of data, that average is varying tremendously. And as we play this out further, right, the data sets that we work with are typically a lot bigger than a couple hundred acres, right? They're typically thousands, tens of thousands, or even hundreds of thousands of acres in size. And what we see when we do that is that the average becomes much, much more stable over time, right? The more data we get, the better estimate we have of that average. And there's a lot of other factors at play here, right? The average is not all that matters, right? The variability matters, the average matters in a particular environment. So this is clearly a gross simplification, but paints the picture of how risky it can be to rely on a very small data set, right? Data from the first 600 acres here painted a very different picture of this hybrid's performance than data from tens, hundreds of thousands of acres did. And the issue is that a lot of existing data sets before we had this ability to aggregate data from growers were really small, right? A lot of trials are conducted on very, very small plots that might be only a couple of rows by maybe a couple of dozen feet, which can be very, very limited. And a lot of growers really only had access to data from what they had experienced on their farm or what their seed companies were telling them. And that doesn't always paint the full picture of how products work in the real world. So when looking at small data sets, we really have to be careful that we're not being fooled by random noise, right? We could think this product was really bad based on the first farmer that submitted data, but as we see later on, that's not actually the case. So in our view, it's really, really critical to have data from a large number of acres so that we can really wash out a lot of the noise that can lead us astray if we only have a small data set. The second reason that I just want to spend a couple of minutes here on is this idea that when we aggregate data across the network, we also give farmers the ability to experiment, albeit virtually, much faster than they can on their own. So for those of you who have worked closely with growers, as I know many of you have, you know that farmers are very experimental, right? Farmers are always trying new things. They're adapting, they're tweaking their practices, trying new inputs, trying to figure out what works on their farm, right? And it's a constant process of evolution as genetics improve, practices improve, equipment improves, climate changes, right? All these things are necessitating farmers to keep staying at the cutting edge of what works and what doesn't. Now, the question is how effectively can one farmer do that on their own farm? So just to walk through an example here, imagine you're a farmer farming about 2,000 acres, so pretty typical farm size, and you want to get data to help optimize your seed selection, right? Picking the right seed to plant, which is a very critical decision. So you want to try how these varieties perform. You want to try it at different soil types, and you also want to experiment with different seeding rates, which is another critical agronomic factor. How long would it take for one grower to test all these possible combinations? Right. And if you do the math on that, you realize that it will take decades for a grower just using their own acres to actually run all these trials, right? They can run trials every year on every single acre, and it still would take forever in a farming lifetime, right? Because you only get one chance per year to get even a modest amount of data on all these products. So this just doesn't really work, right? Farmers need to know sooner how different practices compare and use that to make the best decisions. So this is where the power of the network can be incredibly valuable, right? Well, one grower from their own farm only has data from maybe, a few decades of experience. The collective power of the network has data from tens of thousands of growing seasons. And that means that if you're wondering how would a product work in my region on similar soil types with similar practices, there's probably another grower in the network who has already done that experiment. And learning from what worked or didn't work on their farm is a really powerful way to help optimize your practices on your own farm, right? It's not going to be as good as trying that practice on your own farm. Nothing ever probably will be, but this is a really powerful supplement. So I'll give just a couple examples here of how this actually looks in reality in FBN. This is one of our very popular tools, which really helps farmers make decisions around picking the inputs they want to plant, they want to use on their farm, right? Seed selection here is a really critical decision that affects growers' profitability, their agronomy, their yield potential, their risk. And historically, getting data on how different seed products perform was actually not that easy, right? There's data from seed companies that have their own biases in what products they're proposing. There's data from research farms that are good, but also very limited in scale, potentially limited in how realistic they are, because research farms and on-farm settings can have significant differences in growing conditions. And farmers had data from their own farm, but that didn't usually cover all the products on the market. So we've aggregated together tens of millions of acres of data on real world product performance. And then we make that performance very transparent to growers who submit data. So if you're wondering, what are good products for my region, given my unique conditions, what would work well? We have data that can help growers address that question, leveraging the power of the network. We even take that a step further to automatically propose, in some cases, what products we think would be a good fit on a given field, given the agronomic conditions, the weather patterns, things like that. We also can help growers optimize critical agronomic decisions, things like seeding density, planting date, how does a given variety respond to, late planting or early season drought stress, things like that. Again, using the power of the network, we can aggregate data together and uncover some of these really important patterns about what works and what doesn't for a given product, and then feed that data back to the network to help our growers make the most informed decisions about how they want to manage their farm. And the last example here I'll show is a little bit different, but is also focus on helping farmers optimize their pricing. Farmers, probably spend a huge amount of money on inputs, right? On crop protection, on seed, on fertilizer. And historically, these are markets that are really lacking in price transparency, right? If you're a grower, you want to buy a seed or a chemical, you typically don't have an ability to do so online or look up the price online, right? You typically have to go to your dealer and negotiate a price, right? And what that results in is an information asymmetry where the retailers know the prices that they're charging to every grower, and the farmers only know the price that they're paying personally. And what we've seen in our data, which is based on aggregating invoices from tens of thousands of growers all around the US, Canada, and Australia, is that it's very common for farmers to pay very, very, very different prices for exactly the same inputs, even if they're in the same area, right? And this is really driven by the lack of transparency in the market, but by aggregating and sharing data together, we're able to provide that transparency back to growers so that they can make an informed decision, right? We can say, given this product you're looking at and the region you're in, here's what prices are actually being paid in the real world. And there may be a variety of reasons why a grower may get a higher or lower price based on volume and discounts and rebates, et cetera, but at least they know what other people are paying and can make a more data-driven decision about what price is actually fair. So that's a whirlwind tour of how FBN uses data. I just wanted to wrap up here in the next minute or so and give a little bit of a few high-level thoughts on how we think about data ownership and control, which are issues that are very important to farmers. I think in general, a couple of the principles we think about, right? We always make it very clear to growers that when they join the network, contributing data is optional, right? They can contribute exactly what they want to contribute. They don't have to contribute data they're not comfortable sharing. And it's really up to the grower to decide what they're comfortable with and what they're not. The second key point here is always aggregating and keeping data anonymous, right? So we will take data from thousands or tens of thousands of growers to develop our tools, provide benchmarks, develop our analytics and recommendations, but it's always aggregated such that there's no risk of farmer anonymity ever being compromised, right? You can never say, I'm curious what my neighbor did on their farm. You may be curious, but we can't tell you that, right? We can tell you what's going on in your region, in your county, your state, whatever it may be, but we're not going to tell you what's going on a particular individual's farm. So we're very, very careful about that. And the third principle here is probably the most important, which is never using the data for anything other than helping our members make better decisions, right? We're not ever selling data. We're not ever sharing data externally without the farmer's request. The data is always used to make the network data stronger and then provide more useful tools and services to the network. So we really have to think about constantly making sure that the data is being used in a way that is truly beneficial to the grower and that the grower knows exactly what it's going to be used for. Last slide here that I just want to comment on a little bit is that in order to be successful at getting data from growers, right, which is I know something that is often a difficult topic, it's really, really critical to establish very robust trust with the grower. And part of that entails providing value in return, right? If you're asking for data but not providing anything in return, that feels asymmetrical and typically doesn't build the kind of rapport and trust with the grower that I think is needed to get them to actually go to the effort and time and personal vulnerability and openness of sharing what can be pretty intimate details about their business. It's also really critical to be upfront about what the data will be used for, right? If whether or not the grower agrees with those use cases or not, I think it's very critical to be open and honest and upfront about the use cases that are and are not permitted. And then the most critical thing is also just being very deliberate in your actions to make sure that data actually benefits the people who contributed, right? We can say everything we want, but ultimately what we do is what matters the most, and establishing that trust with growers by showing that the value is actually provided back to people who contributed, I think is really, really critical. So that's all we had. I appreciate everyone's time and attention, and happy to address any follow-ups or questions either now or at the end, whenever makes sense, but really appreciate the chance to share a little bit more about who we are and what we do, and look forward to connecting with any of you virtually now, or hopefully one day in person as well. So I will pause there, but really thanks everyone.
Hey, thanks, Matt. This is Billy Tiller. I'm not sure who's running the show over there, but I'm hoping my slides pop up on the screen since I sent them in. No, I just see Matt. There, maybe we're getting there. I'm going to start a little introduction as they're working. I'm assuming they're working on the slides. So I'm Billy Tiller. I'm the CEO of Grower Information Services Cooperative. It was very enlightening to listen to Matt. I've actually been to one of the big symposiums for FBN to get some insights there. Go ahead and jump to the next slide. And kind of the title on that first slide was sharing data under the umbrella of trust. And actually, it was good for me to hear what Matt said at the end there. I thought that was awesome. They had those same things. Well, I want to give a brief overview of the journey we had. We're actually a cooperative owned by our farmers. Along that path, what we've tried to do since 2012. When I look at what FBN's been able to do as far as scale, Matt, that's impressive. 35,000 members, 90 million acres. We have not accomplished that. In fact, we've sort of scaled back, and I'm going to explain that. But initially, the thoughts were of a national cooperative. We did face a lot of barriers, and some of the barriers we faced were a lot of entrenched interest in farm groups that didn't really want to fill the gap. And that was actually, believe it or not, some of those entrenched interests were other co-ops. As we would talk about the vision, especially bigger co-ops, they would think, can we do this ourselves? And rightfully so. If they have IT departments and they're already doing agronomics and data analytics, that makes sense. But that was a holdup. And then other things we ran across was bigger companies that were stockholder owned. It was very hard for them to put the farmers first. Now you got to understand, I have a unique perspective on this. I do believe in capitalism, and I believe that companies should serve their stockholders. So I've never been opposed to a company taking care of those that own them. But I think there is a unique way that you do that while still serving customers. And so it's a very fine line to walk. That's why I love the cooperative model so much. Not only are they your customers, they're also your owners. And so I'd always really hoping even out of this that even other data co-ops form to go after the same problems. There's a lot of problems to overcome. And really, we decided in about 2019, late 2018, to scale back to something that was more manageable. I started to realize as that happened, it may be difficult to ever have one national repository, someplace all farmers could put data. And I love that idea because of the ease of use of getting farmers to share data with others and for the analytics down there. But because of that, think about how we create interoperability, ways that data can be used across networks. Matt used the word network a lot. I like that. But how can it be used by others across networks? How can raw data be analyzed by various ones? Go ahead and go to the next slide. You know, our solutions, we really always think very simply. And this was sort of a change that came about in 2018, 2019. And it really has helped us to become much more profitable. At the same time, I think right the ship and run a better organization. We don't do any research, and I loved all the analytics Matt showed, but he's actually doing that for all his farmers. That makes sense, but we have to be very careful. There's many people that are specialists in research, but we need to develop tools that are really simple that reach out and handle farmers' needs. Next slide, please. A lot of people talk about data ownership, and in fact, in 2010 and 11, this was sort of the start of me being involved in this. I built a small software company, and at the same time was talking to farmers that were, because I was a farmer myself, about I was seeing the power of data and data ownership, and I've been amazed that literally I'm 10 to 11 years later from when I'm having those conversations, in some cases 12, and this question has yet to be answered. You know, I'm going to say this every time I'm anywhere. As a farmer, I feel like that if I author some data, then I own it. You know, I've never seen Apple come back to me if I wrote a novel on their computer and say, or let's say, and I used Word, neither Apple nor Microsoft are going to show back up and try to take any ownership in my novel. It's ridiculous to me when equipment's used, how that idea of ownership gets transferred. Same thing for an agronomist. If he authors a prescription, he has interest. He has a financial interest in that prescription that he wrote for me. Now I could license it, I can purchase it, but I say all that to get to this. If you decide to transfer data as a farmer or farm group, that's up to you. You should make those decisions. And I'm passionate about this. If you want to work with a company and you're not sure about the outcome, but you think there's a value return and you're okay with it, then you should do that. Those are personal decisions. But I think it is things we should question and make sure we can understand. Go to the next slide, please. Farmer-friendly repository. I love the idea of having a network, data across a network. In farmers' accounts, where actually they can actually have access and to what they share and who they share it with. Again, how are we going to create all the integrations that make these things work? Next slide. I'm going to pick on Matt a little bit here. I'm sure he knows this, but I'd looked this morning and I should have already known this. And I think I did as I think back, but FBN they're a certified company within the Ag Data Transparent. Now, if you don't know what Ag Data Transparent is, I would ask you to go onto the web and search Ag Data Transparent or Ag Data Transparency. And that's going to bring you to an effort that's been around for a number of years where companies are willing to answer questions around what happens to their data, you know, about what happens to the farmer's data. Does he own it? Can he get it back? Et cetera, et cetera. And great job about what's going on there. And I applaud companies that go out and get that certification because it gives a farmer a place to go and really look and be able to read these 10, 12 questions and come up with what's going on with data. You know, sharing's only going to move at the speed of trust. And that's why it's so important that we have things like that. Next slide, please. You know, solutions versus technology. I can't tell you how many, maybe, I don't know, hundreds of companies since the mid 2000s, 2005 on that I've dealt with around that are wanting to use data, that are building technology, and that's all cool. I love that they're building technology, but somewhere in that technology, there must be a solution. And really that involves collaboration and you know, just to be able to collect the right data, to get the right data at the right time, to make analytical decisions on the farm are huge. Next slide, please. Oh, I kind of got ahead of myself. I actually thought it was on that slide. Again, we have to, no, go ahead, go on to solutions. I was actually making some comments about that. I really, as a farmer, I need simple solutions. You know, Matt, I'm gonna go back because I just heard this when he said, you know, seed selector, and actually they would even recommend on a field what seed you should use. Well, I'm going to tell you, if that's something farmers should look at, because we're trying to make life simpler. If the analytics are there and we do learn to trust them, then we should be not spending hours and hours in the research. We should be doing the next thing, you know, preparing the seed beds, thinking about other seeds we can use, but, you know, use the tools that are before us that we can really put in play. Next slide, please. I'm going to give you an example of a more regional approach that we have now. We'll actually find a project that has numerous farmers involved, and we will decide if there's a value creation for them, a real value proposition that will motivate them. And from that, we'll build a project out. This project started in 2018. It's a Twin Platte Natural Resource District water data program. Next slide, please. It is, and I say this all the time, waiting for someone to tell me it's not, but I believe it's the largest fixed IoT deployment of the world. We have around 300,000 acres. Nearly 90% of the acres in that area are participating, and I'll explain why in a minute. But it's got electric wells, non-electric wells, and we tie all those together. Next slide, please. The where is Nebraska, and it's right in kind of south central Nebraska in something called the Twin Platte Natural Resource District. Next slide, please. And in this instance, here's what's going on here. Farmers have to be motivated. They've got plenty to do. And so they're not going to be motivated just because you've got some cool idea. They're going to be motivated to adopt when they see benefit. And in this case, what was happening was the state of Nebraska let the growers in the Twin Platte NRD know that, gee, given the data we have, we've made a determination that you have to return 25,000 acre feet to the stream flow of the Platte River prior to 2029. Now that's a big ask. Think about that across those acres. And so we began to look at the data as GSC, and we said, we actually think you're doing better than that. We don't think that the old goal of 7,700 acre feet was that far off, and 25,000 acre feet looks large by 2029. Let's take a look at the data. Well, the last data that had been collected was around 1997. So the idea was, how are we going to collect this data? Next slide, please. And what we needed was more accurate data, more current data, some way we could garner insights and policies that could be developed that made sense. So, it's the old connect, collect, and verify, and so what we need to do, collect what? We need to collect water use through irrigation, but with what? And how could we scale it? And how could we scale it without it taking years to get into it? I'm going to tell you in a moment how we scaled it. And the beauty of that was, if we'd scaled it any other way, just because of the pandemic and the really low supply of technological parts such as circuits and chips, we'd have had a real issue. But next slide, please. The way we decided to scale it out was using the smart meter. And I always say, if you want to think outside the box, go talk to a farmer. I was actually talking to a farmer in the area, and I'm talking about, I'm not sure that in a couple of years we can get 3,000 water meters installed. I'm not even sure we get 3,000 water meters, given the environment we're starting to face. I'm not sure how we're going to do this. And he said to me, well, why can't you use the electric smart meter? And I said, well, didn't realize y'all had those. He said, every farm here has an electric smart meter on their electric well. And so with some quick research, we found out that 80% of the farms were electric. The wells were electric. And then very quickly learned from talking to the electric cooperatives or the public power districts. So they have a cooperative network or public power, that data came every 15 minutes. So it's like a clock. If we knew when it was pumping, and we could actually identify those kilowatt hours, and we could actually use that on the left there, that electric smart meter, like a clock, to get some approximation of what you get with a highly calibrated water meter. Now, I want to say this about flow meters. They're only as good as they're calibrated because they're strictly a device. Next slide, please. So I'm going to breeze through this because I want to get to questions and conversations. But basically, we get a flow rate, we get hours of operations or electric run times from the electric smart meter. And out of that, we created an unbelievable algorithm that has been audited every year now. We're doing thousands of wells, and it's audited with highly calibrated flow meters. And we're very closely approximating what we would get if we had deployed like that. Next slide, please. So today we have an integrated program that involves a lot of partners, and we're going to talk in a moment about that, so that we can work with Twin Platte. We work with the electric companies. We work with Nebraska Rural Electric, Page Wireless. Sitka is a group that works with Twin Platte. So there's a lot of collaborators that make all this happen, so we can present this data to the grower. Because I kind of think about the old Peter Drucker message, you can only, you can't manage what you can't measure. And that is so true. Next slide. Just a quick look in the next slide. It really, the gray are all the farms that have been checked out. And this is a snapshot of one little particular area along this Platte River. So you can see we have a few greens yet to close. In fact, I see we signed some of those up in the last couple of weeks because we've been working with these growers to get to that. Next slide. So collaboration is the key. I'm just to a point in life that we're never going to get this done one at a time. We have to learn to integrate, collaborate, work together. We need Big Ag to work with us. We need FBN to work with us. We need growers to work with us. We need all these cooperatives to work together. We need to be able to use this data for the best of our ability to assist the farmer. The other things we can do there. We need to get rid of walled gardens, and we need to get rid of siloed data. And if the farmer should have access to his data to be able to share and use that. Next slide, in fact, go 2 slides, because what's the future? You know, it's again, climate, water. But I just want to boil it down to this. How are we going to incentivize these farmers? I mean, these guys, you know, I am frustrated when I talk to groups that say, well, we're going to cover their costs. Well, when have you ever spent more effort to get your costs covered for implementing something? I'm just tired of that as a farmer, and I'm tired of representing farmers that are sort of, you know, they're collecting data, and other people are really getting the best use of that data as far as how it's monetized. So as we go forward, we got to think about ways where farmers can get incentivized. So next slide, make this quick. You know, I'm thinking of examples of more partners, absolutely. Looking for partners all the time that have this thought of how we make farmers better. Example, can I develop a water offset market? And if I can those water offsets help farmers do what they need to do? Can I actually take the electricity saved, turn it into a carbon credit? Next slide. You know, I'm going to stop there. I just want us to think about this. If you really want to get a good answer, you got to collaborate with growers. That's where you're going to get the best data. We got to create an ecosystem full of trust. And I'm just hoping out of these meetings, look, I would love to be better, but if 5 years from now I look back and somebody that was listening started something that started to bring all this together, I would applaud you. I have no pride and ownership here. I'm just wanting to see this in my lifetime come to be. So I'll stop there and turn it to you, Karen. Thank you.
Okay. Well, firstly, thank you, Billy and Matt. Those were really great presentations, and I really would like to thank the organizers of this event. When you know, a call out to Murray Fulton and his team at USAS, because they've done a great job at bringing us together and trying to get us in the same room. Unfortunately, that always doesn't happen today. So thank you to the speakers today and the organizers and all the sponsors that brought us together. So we can go to the next slide. So I'm going to start with the you know, birds tweeting, sunshine, rainbow kind of slide that we like to talk about, because we are motivated, our team, by a lot of things that we're passionate about. And we're passionate about a digital sustainable world, you know, where data flows freely, where we have an idea of what's affecting our planet, and we're not reactive, we're more proactive, where we have a One Health ecosystem, or we understand deeply what is affecting the health of our plants and animals, so that we can eliminate or prevent emerging and endemic diseases. We are very concerned about food security. So we can imagine a food secure world where data-driven sustainable agriculture gives every citizen of our planet economic and physical access to nutritious foods, and it's respectful of culture, resilient, you know, it's resilient, race, religion, age, and gender. Next slide, please. But the reality is that agri-food is a very complex ecosystem, and we talk about it in 2 dimensions, and I see it in 3. It's a dynamical structure. So we are changing in time, we're dynamic, we have lots of players, it's very complicated. There is currently a race to own the data and information, and often it determines economic success. And it's complicated by this legalese of data ownership that we've been talking about all day. So I don't really need to go back into that area, but It's a volatile market disruptions. We've got a lot of that happening in terms of disruptive technologies, war, climate change, pandemics, and now we're dealing with infodemics. And I've had hand experience this year working with the dairy industry on Buttergate, where social influencers had decided that putting palm oil into the feed of dairy cows was affecting the butter, the quality of the butter, and we were seeing more palm oil. It wasn't spreading, it's soft. Throw away your butter and start using margarine. And it cost the industry a tremendous amount of time, resources, thought, and money to address that problem, because we're not connected, we're not collaborating, we don't have insights across our ecosystem. And so that's a lot of what drives us. And there's really, in this era of the infodemic, or as Edelman's survey says, this era of information bankruptcy, we need more data hygiene or more truth sourcing and checking about what's going on in our industries. So this is something that we're very passionate about. How do we do that? How do we connect all these layers so that we can address what's happening to in our industry and provide leadership, but we also prove what we're doing. So next slide, please. We need to move beyond insights, and I think insights are a really good place to start. So what the farm? We always start with the farm. We always want to encourage our farmers to adopt technologies, and we can see the power of aggregating data in the two presentations we just had with Billy and Matt. And these things are very important, but often we demand transparency in the form of data from farmers, and they're required often to provide their data without understanding the context in which they farm. We encourage them to adopt technologies. And there's so many architectures that I've seen that try to connect this ecosystem, and they often see it as a linear ecosystem from start to finish, farm to fork. It isn't that linear. And we often see them plopping the farmer on this data architecture and say, oh, and this is where we're going to collect the farm data. And I don't think they understand how complicated primary agriculture really is, and the relationships and the trust that has to happen there. So I also feel, and our team feels, that we're looking at an age of the digital economy, and that farmers are not represented here. They don't have an identity in this space. And if they do, it's usually only through third-party aggregators. And really, to get insight, as we saw with the presentation from Matt, of course we need to aggregate data, and we need insights, and the things that Billy and his group are doing, there's no question about that. But we're thinking a little bit beyond that. So once you have a description of who you are as a farm, what is your identity? What are you doing that's actually good for the environment? What practices are you using? How are you going to participate in these offset markets as a farmer? How are you going to have an identity in those markets? And all in all, we're not going to accrue benefits for sustainable development goals unless we start with the farm. So this is something that we've thought about for a long time. And we've worked in this area of how do we create a digital strategy for agri-food, and even starting with data cooperative models. And we've spoken to Billy before, and we've had our fair share of challenges as well. So next slide. All right, so the big question is, do you trust me? I mean, trustworthiness becomes a very valuable asset right now. And we talk about technologies to enable trust, like data trusts. But really, trustworthiness is more. It's a well-earned reputation. It's the quality of always being good, honest, and sincere so people can trust you. And we know that the ag community has a lot of players, businesses, associations, and individuals of integrity. There are a lot of really good, trustworthy organizations. From a systems view, in this complex agri-food ecosystem, though, we need to build a trust ecosystem that addresses both trust on the technology side, but on the human side as well, because that is a very complicated set of relationships. So how do we do that? And that's something that we've been working on for quite a number of years now. So please forward. So there is some good news. Like with the pandemic, the infodemic is providing opportunities for business. And in fact, Edelman found that business has become the most trusted institution, even above government. And that's the first time in 20 years that trend has been noticed and happening. So more people are looking to CEOs of companies to align their social values. So this is a real opportunity for business. And like Darcy said, though, there's a caveat. You have to say what you do and do what you say. So how do we do that? I think that's going to be a very important point. So we have an opportunity. How are we going to do it and prove that we're doing what we say we're going to do? The infodemic provided a great opportunity, and we've seen advancements in mRNA vaccines that's really going to significantly affect our public health and our health moving forward. So just like that, the infodemic can be an opportunity as well for ag businesses to build better tools and processes for ethical engagement built around trust. And really that's the strategy our team has taken on. How do we build the trust? How do we leverage these existing services, farm business network, the stuff that Billy Tiller is doing, but how do we energize it? How do we move it beyond that insight and working in business on the farm to engaging with markets in a way that you don't have to provide all your data and that it's a trusted system, both from the human and from the technological perspective. So next slide. So what we've done is we've really focused on this idea of building trust in an ecosystem. And here's a simplified view of what we call the trust triangle. We're leveraging technologies such as decentralized digital identities and decentralized ledger technologies such as blockchain to enable these kinds of ecosystems. And this is an ecosystem of verifiable credentials. So you'll say, you know, what is a verifiable credential? Well, basically, it's a digitally signed, cryptographically verified proof of authenticity of who you are as a farmer or your farm operation. And typically, an example that people use for verifiable credentials is if you're going into a store to purchase alcohol, and you have to prove your age of majority. So you pull out your driver's license from your wallet and you show the clerk, here's my driver's license. But that's just a paper-based authentication of who you are. And on there, there's a lot of information about you on there. There's your address and your age, where you live, and so forth. And there's information in there that nobody really needs to know for you to purchase alcohol. You just have to know that you're age of majority and that you're legally able to purchase that alcohol. So VCs are a way of doing that. In the world of VCs, you have a digital wallet where if you're wanting to purchase alcohol, you pull out your digital wallet and say, yep, here you go. Here's my credential that's issued by a government that says I am the age of majority and I can purchase the alcohol. That's all you have to show. There's no need to move data around and show data or allow people to see some of that privacy characteristics of yourself that you don't want to share. So in this system here, you have an issuer. So issuers are trusted partners that can give you, as a farmer, a verified digitally signed credential, which you keep in your digital wallet about you and what you do. And then when that information is requested as proof, and it could be by a market or regulatory purposes, by a verifier, you can present that through your digital wallet. And it's very, very simple. So you're a farmer, you get a credential. Yes, I have an environmental farm plan. Somebody on the other side is saying, do you have an environmental farm plan and I want to see it? You don't have to show your data, you just have to show your credential. So this is the kind of system that we've been working hard to build the technology and the infrastructure around. So next slide, please. And if you think about it for a minute, think about all the services and advisors that you can engage with that could fill your digital wallet and use it in any way that you wish to use it in aggregate or one-on-one to engage in markets. So it gives you, as a farmer or an organization, an identity in this digital economy. So our solution is really built around two pillars. We have the pillar of governance, and this is super, super important. And then we have the technology side, which is Ag ID. Now, AgBox we use as a holder for that governance authority. And that governance authority is, for example, organization like Billy Tiller's, the GISC, or cooperatives, data cooperatives. They can provide a common implementable governance framework that's designed by those who create, share, and consume the data. So this is really important. Ag ID is the technology. Technology should never be an objective. It's a tool, and it should be a tool of the governance authority or the community of people in ag blocks or the data cooperative or the Dairy Farmers of Canada and so forth. The governance sets the rules, the technology implements the rules and does what the governance needs and provides tools for the governance authority to govern. So our solution, and we've been working hard both on the governance side and on the Ag ID side, and we have a technology stack that enables the rules set by the governance. It is non-proprietary, it is decentralized, and there's no centralized expensive platform, and completely interoperable. So here we've enabled a system where technology is in fact the tool and not the objective. Okay, next slide, please. And I'm going to use this example that, because we've heard from Billy a number of times, and I really am impressed, and the Farm Business Network on the work that they're doing. So if you think about the use of verifiable credentials here, you have the data cooperative working together with a lot of partners, a lot of hard work to get the relationships going for the Natural Resources District, for the water quality, for the water data program. VCs could be used within this system to improve efficiency. So in the case where you don't really need to have to move the data around, you just have to show that proof of what you've done. It might be no-till, or I've stayed within the limitations of my water usage. So you have that accreditation. You don't have to move the data. But we often, in what we're trying to accomplish, is we're thinking beyond that. So how do you leverage that data so that you can engage more effectively, for example, in water offset programs? And it might be that you need a credential from your agronomist. You might need it from your data cooperative. You might need it from Farm Business Network. So on the crop side, if you're working on the animal side, it might be to work on the carbon offset programs. You need a veterinarian credential. You need something from the nutritionist, your feed mill. There's lots and lots of credentials that you can move around. You don't need to move the data. The data's there. It's being stored by your agronomist and your nutritionist and in the soil laboratories. Sometimes all you need is that proof, that accreditation. So it's all working around that trust triangle. It's like a metaphorical chain of trust. And if you think about any data or proof of practice transaction, you can always kind of map it out in terms of this triangle. And individuals can play many roles. They could be a holder of a credential, and they can be an issuer, and they can also be a verifier. If you look right now across Canada, we're seeing tremendous implementations or investments in this verifiable credential space, mostly in health and financial institutes globally. But in Canada, we're seeing it in a lot in the provincial governments who are trying to enable a more citizen-centric approach to government, just as we're trying to enable a more farmer-centric approach to our digital ecosystem. So we have the BC org book, for example, is a good example in BC. They were one of the first to invest and bring a project to bear. Their org book provides verified data about the businesses that operate within BC. So it could be their address, legal names, or licenses, and so forth. We've also have, in the last 2 years, Ontario has launched the digital identification program, and they're going to start by issuing mobile driver's license. And they estimate that there's a $20 or a $20 billion value proposition using verifiable credentials. But the message has been clear from the Ontario government is that we're going to use it for human-centric or citizen-centric government, but we want the private sector to innovate. And I say, Agrifood is absolutely in a great place to leverage those investments from the government in this type of technology. Okay, next slide, please. So I'm just going to summarize a few points. I mean, there's lots and lots we could talk about. We could spend hours talking about how to enable these trust ecosystems from a governance and a technology point of view. But a few closing remarks. Our technology stack, Ag ID, is dead easy to use. It's one application, and you can use it on any device. You can use it on your computer, your laptop, your tablets, and your cell phones. But it gives farmers a digital identity in the digital economy, and now they can connect and interact with consumers or markets in a whole new way. It can be one-on-one, it can be an aggregate with your cooperative, your commodity association. So it's producer-centric, you're in control of your wallets, It also provides for data minimalization. You don't have to move data around, and the credential that you get could be used in a number of different uses. It's so you're reusing all the information that already exists that you don't need to put onto paper and have tons of binders sitting in your, on your desk, which we often see when we visit farms. As you know, what FCC is working on is to digitalize agriculture. So let's get that, motivate that data and get that moving, those credentials about who you are as a farmer and your best practices. I think it will also drive better models for markets such as the carbon offsets. And we don't see enough of these type of markets where it's being driven from the farm up. So if we could provide actual scientific audible proof of what is going on the farm, this is my organic matter, this is my practice, this is my animal welfare, this is how I've done this, we could produce or drive these types of markets that actually are driven by benefits that happen on the farm. And they're not coming down from policy and these models that have no connection to what is actually happening on the farm. So there's no value there. So I think it's important that we think about leveraging all this excellent information, these trustworthy relationships and businesses that we already have in ag, and use it to leverage more value for the farmers that are actually adopting the technologies and doing the hard work. So next slide. I know we've covered, and thank you, but we've covered a lot of concepts in a very short time. And sometimes it's hard for me to, to make it succinct and simple, and I think we want to continue this conversation. We're working really hard. We have a really good team around us. So AgID and AgBox facilitates a more democratic and equitable framework for data and information sharing. That includes technology, and it includes, most importantly, I would say more importantly than the technology, is the governance itself. And the governance is by those who create and use the data. And it's not government, it's governance. So thank you.
Karen, thank you. And Billy and Matt, likewise. I don't know about the rest of you, but I found this session just extraordinary. Some very, very powerful ideas. Dan Lucier this morning in our first session talked about the need to create a data ecosystem. And what we saw here in this last session is in many ways a blueprint for what that kind of data ecosystem might look like. And I really hope this spurs some action. We've got about 10 minutes for questions. I see Tyler has, and welcome Tyler. It would have been nice if you had been able to join us. I understand though why that was not possible, but you asked the question, do any of the panelists know of any examples where traditional audits, paper-based, are being replaced by digital data transfer for proof of practice? So if you've got some of those, anybody in the audience, both here in person or online, just stick it into the chat and we'll look after that question that way rather than going to the panelists. Stan, do we have any questions online?
Murray, we do have two questions that are both related to land data. So I've merged them into one. This is for all of the panelists and one of sub-questions specifically for Matt. The question is, can you provide some high-level examples of how land-related data or geographical information is used in ag tech? Does land data play a role currently or is expected to play a role in ag software that provides intelligence to ag-related organizations or farmers? So for instance, for Matt, does FBN's fields, maps, and analytics feature, does the data come from local land registries or another source?
Good. So I'll go to the panelists. We're going to go into, as we did this morning, rapid round. So short answers, and then we can squeeze a few more questions in. So panelists, and particularly Matt.
Great. Yeah, it's a great question. So I would say yes. I think that those natural features of the land data sets and transactional data sets can be really valuable. I think a couple examples to give, I think we're very focused on integrating data about the actual physical field, right? Be that the underlying soil characteristics, the topography of the field, reflectance from remote sensing data, perhaps during the off season to see what's going on there. A lot of really powerful public data sets from government agencies around the world are really critical to understand what's going on, because you can't really understand the farmers' decisions unless you know the underlying physical characteristics of the field in which they were implemented, sandy soils versus clay soils, et cetera. So I think that's really critical. I also think that land transaction data can be very valuable. We've done some work on quantifying the factors that are most predictive of land valuation and helping growers identify, what is a fair value for a given parcel of land, given similar parcels in the region and things like that. And getting that transaction data can be a little bit difficult. That's a source where you typically publicly available data sets are at least currently, I think sometimes a little bit limited, and that data can be challenging to get, but can be very important. And if you're willing to put in the effort and the work to go look up land transactions, it is possible to get that information. But I think it's very, very, very critical.
Thank you, Matt. Do we have a question here? If not, then I'm going to go. Oh, we do have Bill.
Thank you. Matt, I first have to ask, was your child born yet?
No, it's
Okay, still waiting. Okay.
Yeah, in retrospect, it would have been okay to make the trip, but given we're a week away from the due date, it would have been a little too risky to travel internationally. So hence the reason why I'm not in person.
I don't usually ask personal questions like that, so my apology, but since
it's okay.
you told us that was your barrier. The question I have is for you, Matt. A lot of companies that are involved in data acquisition from farmers are getting sold to other companies or acquired by other companies. And this may be above your pay grade, I don't know, but because this is, if FBN should be sold to somebody else, what kind of protections are there for farmers that their data then isn't sold to another company? Are there any protections?
Yeah, very, very, very good question, Bill. So two comments. One is that we made the decision very early on when we first started FBN, that in our data terms and conditions, it explicitly listed that our data privacy provisions would survive any change in control of the company. So that's basically obligating somebody to, just because they were bought would not, if we were to be acquired, which to be also the second point is that that's certainly not our plan or intention. Certainly not an outcome that have ever been aiming for, and I don't think is the likely outcome, but obviously can't 100% guarantee. But we did make that very clear originally, that the same terms around data ownership and privacy and who it could share with would not change, at least initially in that situation. So that's been a way that we've tried to allay that potential fear with growers, which I very much understand, because there have been other large high profile acquisitions in the ag data space that have made growers, I think, ask that question. And I think it's a very fair, reasonable question to ask.
Well, that leads nicely into a question that Kathleen Gibson has asked online. And she asks, can each of you speak to how your organization is structured, co-op, non-co-op, business, and how are farmers featured in the governance? So Matt, I think this is kind of a nice follow-on from you, and then we'll go to Billy and Karen.
Sure. Yeah. So we are a private corporation. So we're owned by a combination of employees in the company and then investors in the company.
Good. Billy? And we lost Billy's video, but I think he's still there.
Yeah, I'm here, but you won't be able to see me, which is actually probably helps me answering questions, because that's not my best side. My voice is probably much better than my look.
Billy, do you want to say something about how you're?
Oh, we're just a what would be known in the U.S. code as subchapter T, cooperative structure, just like any other cooperative, owned by the members that we serve. We do have, quote, we have a group of members that we no longer consider. I've forgotten the right term, but they don't have a financial interest because they're not patrons of our projects, but they've stayed attached to us, which that's been good. I didn't want to lose them. And there were several thousand of them. And then we began to focus on particular projects and bring them in as a regular co-op member voting.
Excellent. And are farmers involved in the governance? Are they on a board?
Absolutely, the board's all farmers. There's not anyone on the board that's not farmers. Very astute farmers. I think I've been, in fact, I could, nothing against the ones that's on there, but I've been very fortunate. I could pick another 10 and they would be the same kind of guys, just great guys to work with. So absolutely, all a farmer-made board, chairman's a farmer. They all have unique sets of skills using data on their farms, etc.
Excellent, thank you. And Karen.
Yeah, so AgBox, we started the business of AgBox, but looked around and saw a lot of cooperatives and data cooperatives and so forth that can fulfill that kind of niche of that governance. And it's governance by, the farmers and those in the supply chain or their ecosystem. Those are the people that are experts in their fields, for example, that could determine what is a credential, what does it look like, what should be on it, can it be revoked? What's the value of it? So that's really the not-for-profit side of it. And it's got to be governed in a cooperative model. And much like GS1 Canada, if any of you know GS1 Global, they're responsible for the barcodes that are on all the products. So they're a not-for-profit and they enable. And they have a governance and they don't, they're outside of competition. So that's the kind of role of AgBox. Ag ID is a for-profit service industry, but Ag ID, we are a service just like, your cell service. And we don't own anything, we don't own any data. And if you don't like us as a service, you just use another digital identity or, digital wallet service. So we're completely interoperable and it is a for business technology side of this infrastructure.
Excellent, thank you. Other questions? Anybody here? Yeah, Marc-Andre.
Just a question about the Farm Bureau. If a farm client wanted to pull their data, is that something they can do, like extract their data and remove it from your database? Is that and can they? Is there interoperability or transportability in that data? How easy is that process?
Matt?
Yeah, so we do provide solutions on both of those. So we do provide the ability to delete your account and have your data removed. I think at least individual data removed, right? I think by the time, to be perfectly transparent, by the time you've taken individual data, combined it and built aggregate models that are built on large data sets, right? There are still that data may have had some influence on those models over time, right? That is hard to sort of retroactively remove. So it can be removed in the sense that, we don't have the individual grower data that no longer can be accessed online and things like that. So we can do our best to remove it, sort of within the limits of technology truly ever deleting data, right? Which I think gets into a tighter or a little bit of a pickle, right? Where you've had, once data has been uploaded online and stored in databases with Amazon or Microsoft or Google or whoever cloud system you're using to store data that has replicated it. I mean, to truly say it's been 100% deleted, we don't want to mislead people and say that that's possible, but we do the best we can. And data interoperability, we have built API integrations with as many other cloud data systems as possible. So we have one with John Deere, for example, where growers can exchange data between the two systems. And, we think that is a very good thing. We want to enable that whenever we can. And I think it's a good thing for growers to be able to use as many software platforms as they want, where we don't do everything in our software, right? We're not going to, and we don't want to. I don't think it's a good thing for farmers to have data locked in one system. It's good for them and for the industry as a whole, in our view, that data can be seamlessly transferred between systems as at least as seamlessly as possible. So I think that's something the industry still needs to work on, frankly. The interoperability is not where I think it should be, but I think it's a really important goal.
Hey, Murray,
Yeah,
this is
please.
Billy. I'll make a comment here, and this will actually something that, you know, when Matt tries to delete data, you got to understand, and this is something I always think about. I mean, that data has been integrated into aggregated data sets. And to my point, I tell farmers this all the time. They're like, "Oh yeah, we're gonna pull all the data." Well, that's like taking the sugar out of a cake. It's not possible, but they're not identified in there. So I've had so many farmers that I've had to answer this question. Oh, I think my data is still in these aggregated data sets. Well, it is. And you know what? I'm sure when the agreements were signed, that was part of the deal. Again, if you're getting value from whatever you're doing, you were probably using some of those aggregated data sets when you were a member of there, or you were a customer, maybe even another company. I just think farmers need to understand the ramifications of that. But even if they got their raw data back, surely to goodness they've got the raw data. I mean, they supplied it in the first place. But I always like to get into that just so farmers. I mean, I've used that cake example so much. I hear it a lot back to me, but you just can't get the sugar out. There's just not any way. So anyway, I'll stop there.
It's a great image, Billy. I can see why you keep using it. Anyone else? Any other final questions? Well, we're a few minutes. Stan?
There was one online here, also for Matt. This is from Zoom. Matt, you're a very popular person today. Wondering how FBN grew to its current membership number, word of mouth, or any other means?
Good question. I would say a variety of methods. I think that when we first started off, back in 2014, I think a lot of it was word of mouth from a very limited set of initial growers. We had a number of growers who were working with FBN really from the founding team, who would organize meetings and events with their neighbors, right? And things like that. And we would fly out and go to all those meetings and really pounding the pavement, very small scale, right? We'd go to a restaurant with 10 growers or 5 growers and get gradually build the network that way. So I think word of mouth and referrals have always been probably in the early stages, I would say they were 100% of our growth. In the later stages, as we became more of a digital presence online, probably more and more members, started coming in from, we had blogs and reports we put out and digital websites with information and things like that people would start to find. In-person events and trade shows and things like that are really critical as well, and ones where I think being able to meet the team in person was always really valuable. I think we would always attend all the major ag trade shows that are farmer facing, and those are always really critical sources of member growth as well. So I think a little bit of everything, but the word of mouth was really critical, especially in the earlier days, and continues to be a big source of referrals and growth too.
Good, thank you, Matt. Well, I'm going to call this session to a close. As I said earlier, I've found this session to be very informative. We started off this morning talking about the role of trust, the importance of trust, and this has come up again, and then layering on top of that, the role of governance. And as somebody who studies governance, it's interesting to see this now playing out in this new industry that's starting to emerge, and how important that element of trust is. And it's something that, at least in my professional life, I'm an economist, and economists never talk about trust. They think it just exists somehow magically, and yet all of our discussions today indicate that this is the essential glue that's actually required to make all these other activities work. So I've really enjoyed this. Thank you very much to our 3 speakers, to Matt, to Billy, to Karen, and for those of you both online and here in person, please join me in giving our speakers a round of applause.